They walked into Beverly's diner expecting to throw their weight around, but the Blue Python MC never counted on a silent waitress with a secret Delta Force background. In a split second, she disarmed their intimidation with expert skill, leaving them and everyone else absolutely stunned. Want to hear the full story of how a few brave souls managed to turn fear into hope? Stick around and find out the surprising twists that unfold, from tense standoffs to unexpected acts of unity. Before we jump into all the drama and redemption, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps to bring more heartfelt and empowering stories to life. Plus, you won't want to miss the stunning conclusion of this incredible journey or the other stories we share that can inspire your own real-life transformations. Stay tuned and let's discover together how one quiet person with a courageous heart can change an entire community. Beverly's Diner had been a staple of the tiny Montana town for nearly 4 decades. Its exterior painted in faded red and white stripes that hinted at the more vibrant days behind it. Locals loved the place for its all-day breakfast platters, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the warm greetings from Beverly Rhodes herself, a woman in her late 50s who carried a perpetual gleam in her eye. The diner occupied a corner lot on the town's main street, an unassuming structure of glass windows and old-fashioned neon signs that buzz quietly at night. On a typical day, you'd find truckers passing through for a hot meal, ranchers grabbing a late lunch after a hard morning's work, and a handful of families looking for a cozy place to feed restless kids. This particular evening, the sun was on the verge of setting, painting the surrounding sky with streaks of pink and orange. Inside, the neon lights mixed with the sunset glow, giving everything a slightly magical haze. Behind the worn Formica counter stood Beverly, wiping glasses with a tattered cloth while exchanging small talk with a regular, Mr. Martinez, a Korean War veteran who'd been coming in every Thursday night for as long as anyone could remember. He'd settled himself at the counter with a lukewarm cup of coffee, occasionally glancing at the old clock above the menu board as if time in this diner moved differently, slower, kinder. Walking the floor was Faye Lawson, the newest waitress to join Beverly's staff. She wore the diner's pink and white uniform, neatly pressed, her light brown hair tied back into a sensible bun. Anyone glancing her way would guess she was in her late 20s or early 30s, though her posture and the certain sharpness in her eyes suggested life experience that reached far deeper. Faye had arrived in town about 2 years earlier, her origins unknown to most, and a story she kept largely to herself. Still, the locals had taken a liking to her impeccable memory for orders and the quiet, steady calm she brought with her. Even Beverly sometimes tried prying to see if Faye might share something about her past. But Faye always kept it polite and vague, some mention of just moving around or looking for a quieter life. That was enough for the townsfolk. They respected her privacy because she always treated them with warmth and respect in return. A little after 6 p.m., a mother named Angela Pratt slipped into one of the corner booths with her 2 children, a 7-year-old boy named Brady and a 5-year-old girl named Haley. Both kids had crayons in hand, eagerly coloring on the children's menu that Beverly had distributed. They were finishing up a grilled cheese platter with fries, while Angela typed on her phone, occasionally checking in on the kids. Faye made sure to swing by with water refills and an extra napkin or two, always anticipating what they might need. There was a hush in the diner, that comfortable lull where silverware clinked gently against plates and low chatter filled the background. "Refill, Mr. Martinez?" Faye's voice broke the silence in that warm yet efficient manner she had. She was already tipping the coffee pot over his mug before he could reply. He gave a grateful nod. Faye turned, scanned the diner, and made mental notes of who might be needing service next. If someone observed her closely, they'd notice she rarely had her back turned for long. Her eyes swept the room in regular intervals. An odd habit, perhaps, but it ensured she was always aware of who was coming and going. It was, she said, just part of providing excellent service. Yet even with that subtle watchfulness, there was a deeper tension in Faye's posture tonight, almost imperceptible but still present. Mr. Martinez, who had also known war's weight, recognized a certain set to her shoulders that was reminiscent of a soldier anticipating potential trouble. And trouble arrived soon enough, announced by the roar of 5 motorcycles pulling up in front of the diner. The screeching rumble of motorcycle engines shattered the calm inside Beverly's diner. Heads turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window, which offered a view of the dusty street out front. Angela instinctively reached for her children's hands under the table, sensing the shift in energy. Beverly paused her glass-wiping routine, meeting Faye's gaze from across the diner with an unspoken question. Should I worry? Faye set down the half-filled mug she was carrying and subtly shook her head at Beverly, signaling her to hold off any panicked reactions. Then stepping closer to the window, Faye caught sight of the newcomers dismounting their bikes. They wore black leather vests adorned with embroidered patches that read Blue Python MC. She knew enough about motorcycle clubs. Some were benign, formed by veterans or enthusiasts simply looking for camaraderie. But others had reputations that preceded them, rumors of intimidation, drug running, or worse. This group, based on their menacing posture and the way they scanned the surroundings, hinted at the latter. A band of riders accustomed to getting their way through fear. As they ambled in through the diner's front door, the lead biker, a tall man with a shaved head and a faint scar across his left cheek, immediately took stock of the patrons. His name, embroidered on the vest, read Colt. He gave a half smile that felt more predatory than friendly. Behind him was Dex, shorter but wiry, with tattoos slithering up his neck in a serpentine pattern. Likely from his time in service or from a stint in prison, or both. Trailing them were three more members, large, bearded men with stoic faces, scanning for easy marks or immediate threats. Angela looked to Faye with widening eyes. She gathered her children's crayons, sliding them into her purse as she mouthed, "We should probably go, right?" Faye offered a reassuring nod. The mother turned to help her children put on their small jackets as quietly as she could. One of the bikers, picking up on the movement, let out a laugh that held no real mirth. He turned his gaze to Angela, making a show of stepping sideways to block her potential path. "Leaving so soon?" he sneered, the question dripping with a condescension. "We just got here." Beverly, who had seen more than her share of rowdy customers, edged closer to her phone by the register. Faye caught her eye again, giving a subtle not yet signal. Despite the knot forming in Beverly's stomach, she trusted Faye's instincts. Ever since Faye had started working at the diner, she'd shown a knack for diffusing tense situations before they spiraled. Tonight, though, something about the look in Faye's eyes told Beverly that this was different. These men were not just rowdy travelers looking to blow off steam. They carried a dangerous edge. "Excuse me," Faye began gently but firmly, stepping between the biker and Angela's booth. She was just finishing up. "Let her pass." Colt barked a laugh from behind the men. "Look at that, the waitress wants to play hero." He moved closer, leaning his tall frame over Faye. The diner fell silent, the overhead fluorescent lights seeming to hum louder in the hush. Mr. Martinez placed his mug down, his hand trembling slightly, as though old memories of conflict rattled him. Angela clutched her children, whose faces were twisted in confusion and fear. Brady asked in a whisper, "Mom, can we go home now?" Angela shushed him softly, her eyes flicking between Faye and the hulking bikers. Beverly hovered, uncertain whether to intervene or to call the local deputy. Faye, meanwhile, maintained her composure, her voice clear and calm as she repeated, "Let them leave, please." In the reflection of a chrome napkin dispenser, Faye eyed the positions of all five bikers. They were spreading out in a formation reminiscent of something she recognized from a past life. It was a standard tactic for intimidation. One near the entrance, two at the back, and the leader flanked by a trusted subordinate. She could also see that Dex's gaze never left her. He was observing, sizing her up more carefully than the others. Whether that was a sign of intelligence or suspicion, Faye couldn't yet tell. Colt lifted his chin, attempting to loom over Faye, who stood almost a foot shorter than him. The height difference would have rattled most people, but Faye didn't flinch. Her expression remained neutral, and her brown eyes held steady, scanning Colt's stance. She caught a twitch in his left shoulder, a telltale sign he might strike or lunge without warning. Years ago, such a detail had meant the difference between life and death for her and her teammates. Now it simply meant she was prepared. "So polite," Colt sneered, his scar flexing as he tightened his jaw. "Maybe we ought to teach you some manners while we're here. After all, a little conversation never hurt anyone." From behind him, one of the other bikers snickered, a cruel sound that made Angela's daughter whimper. Faye subtly shifted her weight, placing her feet in a position that allowed for quick movement. both defensive and offensive. Even as she did so, she managed to maintain a placid tone. You're welcome to eat here. You're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. But if you threaten customers, I'll have to ask you to leave. Ask us to leave? Dex echoed, clearly amused. He toyed with a ring on his finger, a silver serpent coiled around a black stone, matching the serpent motif on his neck. We haven't even had a chance to place an order. Maybe we want coffee. Maybe we want a piece of that pie. His eyes flicked to the glass display near the register. And maybe, Colt growled, we want to see just how tough this little diner girl really is. His hand shot out, aiming to grab Faye's wrist in a lightning-fast move. Before Colt could even close his fingers around her arm, Faye pivoted with effortless grace. She stepped aside, hooking his wrist in a simple redirect that utilized his own momentum. Colt stumbled past her, eyes widening in disbelief that this apparently timid waitress had sidestepped him so easily. The motion was fluid, so quick that some of the diners barely registered what had happened. Angela blinked, hugging her kids closer. Beverly froze, phone clutched in her hand, forgetting momentarily that she even had it. That's one, Faye said softly, her voice still composed. Let's not make a second mistake. Colt turned sharply, fury twisting his features. The tension escalated in an instant as the other members of the Blue Python MC came alive. One of the bikers by the door took a half step forward, stopping when Dex shot him a look. Dex seemed transfixed by Faye's calm efficiency, and for a moment he looked more intrigued than angry. The mother, Angela, seized the opportunity to slip past them toward the exit, ushering her children out of harm's way. Neither Colt nor his men bothered to block her now. Their focus had zeroed in on the waitress, who seemed far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. You sure you want to keep going with this? Faye asked Colt, her hand hovering near her apron pocket. She carried only a pen and an order pad there, but her stance suggested she wouldn't need anything more if it came to a physical altercation. Another look at her eyes would tell any seasoned fighter that she wasn't bluffing. This was someone who had seen real conflict and walked away from it. Faye's skill radiated from her in that intangible way that trained combatants recognize immediately. Colt exhaled, frustration mingling with confusion. You don't know who we are, he said, his voice lower now, brimming with menace. This is our territory. People around here don't say no to the Blue Python MC. And you don't know who she is, Mr. Martinez interjected from the corner, surprising even Faye. He set down his mug carefully, his hand trembling less now than before. You've got no idea what you're stepping into, boy. A flicker of uncertainty showed on Dex's face. He exchanged a glance with the other bikers, but Colt was too far gone in his anger to step back. She's a waitress, Colt spat, and I'll show her just how we handle retired Delta Force, Mr. Martinez said, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. The words fell like a sledgehammer, sending ripples of shock through the entire room. Mr. Martinez turned to Faye and gave a slight nod, as though he'd finally recognized her movements for what they were. Colt froze mid-sentence. The other bikers, too, reacted with visible surprise, their aggressive stances faltering. Not everyone understood the significance of Delta Force, but the expression on Dex's face said it all. He at least seemed to grasp the gravity of that background. Delta Force operators were among the most elite warriors in the U.S. military. In clandestine circles, their name carried a certain mythic weight. If Faye Lawson truly was part of that group, then the narrow gap between them felt suddenly insurmountable for the average thug. For a moment, the diner felt as still as a photograph. No one breathed, no one moved. Even Beverly's phone seemed to have frozen in her trembling hand. Outside, through the plate glass window, the last streaks of sunset dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep indigo that mirrored the uncertain hush inside. Then Colt, chest heaving with adrenaline and wounded pride, let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, right. And I'm the president, he mocked, though less convincingly than he might have intended. He glanced at Dex, looking for confirmation. Dex shrugged slightly, lips pressed thin. His silence was telling. Believe it or don't, Faye responded, stepping back just enough to show she wasn't attacking, yet wasn't letting her guard down either. This can end here. You can turn around, walk out, and keep your dignity. Or you can find out exactly how many of you it'll take to put me on the ground. She paused, her gaze roving over their faces with calm certainty. And I doubt you have enough. The hush lingered for another beat before the heavy drone of approaching sirens broke the tension. Red and blue lights flashed against the diner's windows as local law enforcement cruisers arrived, alerted no doubt by someone who had quietly called 911. Perhaps it was Angela on her way out, or maybe Beverly had pressed a silent alarm. Faye spared a glance outside, seeing the reflection of two squad cars pulling up. Colt, Dex urged, stepping closer. There was a note of warning in his voice. Cops are here. Colt's eyes flickered with indecision. He seemed to weigh his desire to save face against the reality that staying meant tangling with both a potential special operations level threat and the police. When he finally spoke, the bluster was weaker. We'll go, he said, lifting his chin a notch. But don't think for a second this is over. Faye met his gaze, offering no retort. She simply watched as the Blue Python MC members formed up behind Colt, moving in a tight pack toward the exit. Dex lingered a moment longer, his eyes locked on Faye with an expression equal parts respect and a simmering resentment. Then he followed Colt out the door, and a few seconds later, the thunder of motorcycle engines echoed into the night as they sped away. The tension inside the diner gradually eased, replaced by a collective exhale of relief. Beverly let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and finally set the phone down on the counter. Mr. Martinez nodded at Faye, a small smile touching his lips. He was never going to believe you if you said it yourself, the old veteran said quietly. Sometimes folks need a little outside confirmation. Faye managed to smile back, though there was weariness behind it. I'd have preferred not to let that out in the open, she said in a low tone. She turned to Beverly, who looked both amazed and concerned. I'm sorry if I startled anyone. You okay, Bev? I'm better now that they're gone, Beverly replied, regaining her composure. Then softening her voice, she added, Faye, I had no idea about your background. Faye shrugged, glancing at the other patrons who were still staring at her. She felt a flush creeping up her cheeks. I try not to advertise it. I just want to do my job in peace. Mr. Martinez's gaze swept around the diner. Well, you likely just made yourself a local legend, he said. But it was for the best. Could have been a lot worse if you weren't here. With the immediate threat gone, the diner began to feel like itself again, though not entirely. The neon lights buzzed overhead, casting their soft hum, and the smell of fresh coffee reclaimed its space. One by one, patrons returned to their seats, though the shaken mother and her children had already left. A hum of conversation rose as people tried to process what they just witnessed. Beverly beckoned Faye over to a quiet corner near the pie display, away from the murmurs. Listen, honey, she began, her voice edged with concern. I don't mean to pry, but I think you owe me a little explanation. I mean, you're free to live your life however you like, but if trouble like that is going to follow you in here, you need to know you're safe, Faye finished Beverly's sentence gently. I get it. And you are safe, Beverly. I promise I left that life behind me long ago. Beverly's anxious eyes studied Faye. Delta Force, she repeated, as though testing the words on her tongue. That's no small claim. People don't just breeze through something like that and end up waiting tables. Faye hesitated, searching for words that would reassure Beverly without diving too deeply into the painful chapters of her past. I did 3 tours, she said at last. Saw a lot, did a lot, and after it all ended, I needed a fresh start. This town was quiet, exactly what I needed. I was content just blending in, you know? Beverly let out a soft sigh, her expression melding relief with lingering apprehension. Well, I can't say I'm not grateful you were here tonight. Otherwise, those bikers might have caused a real mess. But I also worry about what happens if they come back. They might, Faye admitted. Guys like Colt don't like losing face, especially not publicly. But I'll handle it if it comes to that. I'm sorry if it brings any trouble to your diner. Beverly shook her head, patting Faye's shoulder in a motherly gesture. You saved us is what you did. Don't apologize. She paused for a moment, turning as one of the uniformed officers came in to take statements. You better talk to them, Beverly suggested. Then maybe take the rest of the night off. Get your head together. We'll manage. The officer approached a middle-aged man named Deputy Connor. He glanced at the assembled diners, then nodded at Faye, recognizing her as the central figure in the commotion. Ma'am, can I ask you a few questions about the altercation? Sure, she said, following him to a quiet spot by the entrance. She reiterated the basic events: the biker's intimidation, Colt's attempt to grab her, and how she diffused it. Faye chose her words carefully, omitting the detail about her military background. But Mr. Martinez's outburst had already floated around in the diner's conversation. Deputy Connor made a note of that. Delta Force, huh? He said, raising an eyebrow. We don't see that in these parts often. If that's true, I'm guessing you know what you're doing. Faye responded with a slight nod, hoping he'd leave it at that. He did. After wrapping up the statement, the deputy assured her they'd keep an eye out for the Blue Python MC and left. Faye knew well enough that the local force, while good-hearted, wasn't exactly equipped to take on a well-organized motorcycle club if things escalated. She'd have to stay vigilant. By the time the officer departed, the diner was winding down. Beverly insisted that Faye go home and rest, and the few remaining customers gave her a wide berth of admiration and caution. As Faye stepped out into the cool Montana night, she spotted the deep shadows cast by the neon sign on the pavement. She exhaled, the chilly air cutting through her uniform. Part of her regretted the confrontation. Blending in had been her sole intention when she arrived in this town. Now, that cover was gone. Faye's small apartment was only a 10-minute walk from Beverly's diner, a cozy one-bedroom space atop a local hardware store. The landlord was a kind, elderly man who rarely asked questions, which suited Faye just fine. She liked the anonymity, the ease of living above a place that smelled of sawdust and paint instead of constant chatter. Tonight, however, her footsteps felt heavier than usual as she climbed the narrow staircase. Her reflection in the apartment's front window, tired eyes, uniform slightly rumpled, reminded her she was no longer just the quiet waitress. The entire town would be buzzing with stories by sunrise. Once inside, Faye flipped on a single lamp. Its soft glow illuminated the modest living room, furnished with a second-hand couch and a simple coffee table. She tossed her keys on the table, then stared at the blank television screen for a moment before sinking onto the couch. Memories she usually kept buried began surfacing. Nights spent on covert operations in faraway deserts. The tense stillness before breaching a hostile compound. The echo of her own heartbeat in her ears. She remembered her squad mates, men and women with whom she'd forged bonds that went deeper than family. And she remembered losing some of them, each loss etched into her soul. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and closed her eyes. In those days, she'd been known as a force to be reckoned with. Methodical, highly trained in infiltration and direct action, able to handle high-pressure scenarios. Civilians never really saw that side of her. They just saw a stoic soldier, or now a calm waitress. The difference was, in the diner, it was far less likely that someone would shoot back. That was the life she wanted, simple, unassuming, free of violence. Yet violence seemed to find its way back to her, no matter how deeply she buried her history. Finally, after a few minutes of letting the tension subside, Faye rose and headed to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water, noticing her hand tremble just slightly. Not fear, she realized, but an adrenaline aftershock. Her training had taught her that the body experiences stress in waves. It wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it lingered, creeping in quietly once the danger had passed. She took a few sips and reminded herself, I'm safe. This is Montana. The threat is gone. But even as she repeated those words, she knew the Blue Python MC wasn't a threat easily cast aside. Men like Colt built their reputations on never backing down, especially not after being publicly humiliated. If he found out who she really was, or if he decided to test the rumor of Delta Force, he might come back with a different plan, one that wouldn't rely on open intimidation in a crowded diner. Faye moved to the window, peering at the dark street below. The hardware store's lighted sign flickered, painting sporadic shadows across the pavement. She checked for unfamiliar bikes or silhouettes in doorways. Seeing nothing suspicious, she let out a slow breath. Tomorrow she'd go back to the diner, carry on as usual, and hope the memory of that confrontation faded quickly from everyone's minds. Yet she knew that was wishful thinking. If there were one thing small towns clung to, it was a good story, and the waitress who faced down a biker gang was certainly that. Morning came with the soft glow of the Montana sunrise spilling through Faye's curtains. She had barely slept, her mind drifting between memories of her military service and speculation about Colt's next move. Nonetheless, she forced herself up, laced her worn running shoes, and jogged through the still, quiet streets. Running helped her center herself, a habit she'd picked up long before the Army, but which had taken on greater meaning during her special operations training. It was a time for her thoughts to decompress, for her body to shake off lingering tension. She zigzagged through the small town, passing local shops that were just opening, an antique store with dusty windows, a bakery releasing the warm smell of fresh bread, and a grocery store that doubled as a post office. Every so often, she'd nod politely to an early riser stepping out to pick up the newspaper. Many recognized her now, though in a new light, having heard rumors of last night's events. She could see it in their hesitant smiles or the curious tilt of their heads, as if unsure how to greet a former special operator turned waitress. Faye kept her head high, returning their nods without breaking stride. She wasn't ashamed of who she was. She simply didn't want the spectacle that came with it. After returning home for a quick shower, Faye made her way to Beverly's diner for her shift. It was just past 7 a.m. when she arrived, and the place was already alive with the sizzling of bacon on the grill and the murmur of customers chatting over coffee. She saw Beverly engaged in conversation with Harriet Winston, who ran the local Veterans Support Center. Harriet was in her early 40s, always impeccably organized, and dedicated to helping vets reintegrate into civilian life. She often came by to leave flyers at the diner's entrance, promoting job fairs or counseling sessions. When Harriet caught sight of Faye, her brow furrowed with concern. "Faye," Harriet called out gently, "I heard about what happened last night. You okay?" "I'm good," Faye answered, keeping her tone reassuring. She knew Harriet meant well. "No injuries, just a little shaken up, that's all. But we got them to leave without serious trouble." Beverly shot Faye a quick glance. "There's coffee on if you want some. Might need it after last night." As Faye rounded the counter, she noticed Mr. Martinez at his usual spot. Though he was in earlier than normal, he gave her a half smile, lifting his mug in greeting. Nearby, a few other regulars cast sideways looks, obviously hoping for a recap of the dramatic showdown they'd only heard about secondhand. Faye obliged with a brief account, downplaying her own role as much as possible. She could sense Harriet listening carefully. Once she'd finished pouring coffees and clearing a few tables, Harriet approached her with a purposeful air. "You know," Harriet began quietly, "if you ever want to talk about things, your past, how it affects your present, I run a group for female vets. Might be helpful, especially after a night like that." Faye appreciated Harriet's concern, but shook her head gently. "Thanks, Harriet. I'll keep it in mind, but I'm managing fine. Last night was just an ugly reminder of who I used to be." Harriet's gaze was compassionate. "Being highly trained doesn't mean you can't live a peaceful life. You deserve that peace too, you know." Faye mustered a small smile. "I'm working on it." She set aside a menu on the counter, preparing to greet a few new patrons who were just arriving. The bell above the diner door jingled softly. Though the morning air felt crisp and inviting, a quiet unease still lingered in Faye's chest. She couldn't shake the notion that Colt's promise, "Don't think for a second this is over," was hanging over her like a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. Midway through the busy breakfast shift, Harriet stepped out to handle her errands, but not before inviting Faye to stop by the Veterans Support Center sometime. Faye politely thanked her and said she'd consider it. After the rush died down, Beverly gave Faye a nudge. "Go take a break, hun. You've been at it nonstop since you walked in." Faye removed her apron and slipped out the side door into the alley behind the diner. The smell of frying bacon faded into the cool morning air, replaced by the scent of damp pavement and the faint, sweet fragrance of wildflowers carried on the breeze. She leaned against the brick wall, taking a moment to decompress. That's when she heard the familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine approaching, a sound that set her on instant alert. Peeking around the corner, she saw a single biker pulling up to the curb in front of the diner. He cut the engine and removed his helmet, revealing Dex, Colt's second-in-command from the Blue Python MC. Faye's heart kicked up, but she forced herself to stay calm. He didn't look aggressive, rather he seemed unsettled, glancing around as if he wasn't sure he should be here at all. He wore the same black leather vest with the club's emblem on the back, but his posture was less threatening than it had been the previous night. Faye contemplated stepping back inside to grab Beverly or even Harriet, but her instincts told her to see what Dex wanted. If he'd come alone, there might be a different motive than intimidation. Drawing in a steady breath, she emerged from the alley and walked toward him, hands at her sides, intentionally non-confrontational. He noticed her immediately, his gaze sharpening. "Faye Lawson?" he asked, voice subdued. Faye nodded, maintaining eye contact. Dex shifted his weight, one hand gripping the helmet he held at his side. "Look, I'm not here for trouble." Faye inclined her head slightly, letting him speak. She was keenly aware of his twitchy body language, but also of his attempt to project calm. "Okay," she said, "then why are you here?" He exhaled, looking around to ensure no one else was within earshot. "Colt doesn't know I'm here," he admitted. "If he did, I'd probably be in deep for even talking to you." Pausing, Dex let out a strained laugh that lacked humor. "But last night watching you, it reminded me of something." Faye's caution peaked. "What's that?" "Back in Afghanistan," Dex said, almost too casually. "2 tours, infantry. I remember seeing Delta folks around. They had that same look, like the world never fully leaves them, but they're always in control. Some of them had a way of diffusing a situation without setting off a single shot." He ran his free hand through his buzzed hair. "What you did last night, well, it's not just anyone who can pull that off." Faye tensed slightly, scanning the sidewalk for any sign of Colt or other Blue Python members. "You're telling me you served? In the army?" Dex gave a nod, tapping the tattoo on his neck, a stylized dagger. "Some of us in the club are vets. We joined up after we got out, needed a sense of belonging or purpose or something." His voice dropped lower. "But this isn't what I signed up for, you know? Extorting diners and harassing families. That's not who I was trained to be." Faye studied him carefully. She saw the conflict etched in his eyes, recognized the restless energy of someone who'd seen combat and hadn't quite found a peaceful landing afterward. Part of her could empathize. She'd had to claw her way out of her own darkness. "So why come to me?" she asked. "Because I saw something in you," he responded, sounding a bit embarrassed. "Something that makes me think you still remember the best parts of serving, protecting those who need it most. And also," Dex hesitated, "Colt has a kid, a 12-year-old daughter named Lily. She saw the video of last night. It's gone viral in our circles. Her dad getting knocked off balance by a diner waitress. She called him crying, asking him why he's acting like the bad guy instead of the hero she used to see him as." Dex let out a slow breath. "He's different today. And the guys who are also vets, we're all feeling that maybe we've gone too far down a bad road." Faye sighed, absorbing Dex's words. Her mind flashed with an image of Lily, a frightened 12-year-old, seeing her father in an unflattering new light. And she remembered Angela's kids from last night, looking equally scared. Perhaps there was a common thread here: children facing the consequences of their parents' choices. "So you're telling me Colt is reconsidering things?" she asked, a bit skeptical. "That's hard to believe, given his parting words." Dex shook his head. "Colt's pride is wounded. He's not going to say it out loud, but Lily's call shook him. You can see it in the way he's been pacing around the garage all morning, not talking to anyone. He's, parked himself by the diner across the street in his truck. He let Lily go inside for breakfast, but didn't want to step foot in there himself, like he's ashamed or something. I'm just letting you know because, well, maybe you'd want to talk to him?" A wave of conflicting emotions surged through Faye. Part of her was relieved that Dex wasn't here for a rematch. Yet another part was uneasy about getting tangled further with these bikers. She'd come to this town for peace, not to become entangled in the redemption arcs of men with violent pasts. But Harriet's voice echoed in her mind. "Being highly trained doesn't mean you can't live a peaceful life. You deserve that peace too, you know." Maybe part of that journey was helping others lay down their weapons, literally or metaphorically. "I don't know," Faye admitted. "I'm not a social worker or a therapist. I'm just a waitress who used to be a soldier." Dex looked at her pointedly. "That's exactly why he might listen to you. Because you understand what it's like to have your identity so tied up in something that you forget who you are outside of it. The rest of us, we just see him spiraling." He took a tentative step back, slipping his helmet onto his head. Anyway, I've said my piece. If you want to approach him, do it on your own terms. The last thing I want is for him to think I betrayed him, but I'd rather see him walk away from this life than keep doubling down until something really bad happens. With that, Dex swung his leg over the bike and kick-started the engine. He paused for a final word. I'm around if you need me, maybe not officially, but I'll be around. Then he rode off, the roar of his motorcycle fading as he disappeared down the main street. Faye stood there staring at the space Dex had just occupied. She couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. How many soldiers had she known who came back from war only to drift into anger, addiction, or destructive behaviors simply because they had nowhere else to channel their intensity? Her own path had nearly turned dark before she found solace in serving coffee and burgers at Beverly's Diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Was it fair of her to deny Colt or Dex the same chance to turn their lives around? Steeling herself, Faye walked back into the diner, the overhead bell jingling softly. Beverly gave her a look that asked 1,000 questions at once. Faye simply said, I'll explain later, and grabbed a fresh pot of coffee. She scanned the tables, and sure enough, there was a girl about Lily's age sitting alone in a corner booth, stirring a cup of hot chocolate. She had long, dark hair and wore a denim jacket that seemed 2 sizes too big. Her gaze was fixed on the window, as though waiting for someone, likely her dad, who refused to come inside. Faye drew in a breath. This was new territory for her, bridging the gap between a father stuck in old patterns and a daughter who craved a better example. And yet, maybe this was exactly the role she needed to play, whether or not it was comfortable. A slight hesitation tugged at Faye as she approached Lily's booth. She dealt with hardened adversaries and high-stakes missions, but talking to a preteen who might be confused or frightened felt like unfamiliar emotional territory. Yet the same sense of duty that once drove her to protect civilians overseas now nudged her forward. She placed the coffee pot on a nearby table and gently cleared her throat. Hey there, Faye said softly, smiling in a way she hoped was reassuring. Name's Faye. I noticed you're sitting alone. You doing okay? Lily glanced up, her eyes wide with surprise. She nodded slowly, then looked back down at her hot chocolate. Faye could see the swirl of whipped cream melting along the rim of the mug, untouched except for a few half-hearted stirs. I'm fine, Lily mumbled. Just waiting for my dad. Faye slid into the seat across from her, not waiting for an invitation but moving slowly so she wouldn't alarm the girl. Your dad, that wouldn't happen to be Colt, would it? She saw a flash of recognition on Lily's face. The girl tensed, as if expecting judgment or blame. It's okay, Faye quickly added. I'm not mad at him. I just heard he was out there in his truck and, well, I figured you might want some company. Lily's shoulders slumped slightly in relief. He doesn't want to come in, she said, sighing. Normally he loves diner breakfast, but I guess he's, embarrassed about last night. She stared at her mug, swirling it in a slow circle that sent ripples through the chocolate. I get it, Faye replied, leaning forward with her forearms on the table. I've been embarrassed before, though maybe not for the same reasons. But can I tell you something? She waited for Lily to nod before continuing. Your dad's not a lost cause. Whatever he did last night, or any night, he can still change, if he wants to. Lily's eyes moistened, and she quickly looked away, blinking. I used to think he was the coolest, she whispered, her voice trembling. He taught me how to ride my bike without training wheels, how to fix a flat tire. He did these safety classes at the community college for a while too, but after the college canceled the program, he just started drifting. Joined up with these guys and everything went downhill. Now everyone talks about him like he's a thug, and maybe he is. Faye was struck by the sincerity in Lily's voice, the heartbreak of a child who has watched a parent lose their way. She reached across the table, gently touching Lily's hand. Kids see more than adults give them credit for, Faye said, and you're seeing him at a crossroads. Sometimes people do bad things when they feel lost. But your call made him think. Dex told me that much. Lily frowned, wiping at her eyes. Yeah, well, I don't know if it'll matter. He has a reputation with the blue pythons. He always says how important it is not to look weak. Faye nodded, recalling the same sense of pride that can keep soldiers from asking for help. Believe me, I understand. But sometimes admitting you need help is the bravest thing you can do. For a moment, they sat in silence, the background hum of the diner filling the space between them. Lily turned to the window where Colt's truck was parked. She couldn't see him from this angle, but she imagined he was just as restless as she was. "He's going to drive me back to the clubhouse soon," she said with a sigh. "Do you want that?" Faye asked gently. Lily hesitated. "I just want him to be normal again, or at least to realize he doesn't have to be some big bad biker to be respected." She looked at Faye, a mix of hope and desperation. "You stood up to them, and you're not even big or scary, you're just strong." Before Faye could respond, the bell above the diner door jingled again, and in walked Harriet Winston with a stack of brochures under one arm. She spotted Faye and Lily in the corner booth and made a beeline for them. "Hey, Faye," she said softly, taking in the emotional vibe. "Just came by to drop off some new flyers. Everything all right?" Faye nodded, but Lily's watery eyes told a different story. Harriet gave the girl a warm smile. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Harriet. I run the local Veteran Support Center a few blocks away." She set the brochures on the table. One was about job training for veterans, another about therapy groups and community programs. Lily glanced at them, sniffing quietly. "My dad served too," she said, though there was a faint tremor in her voice. Harriet's expression brightened. "Oh, well, that makes him eligible for all sorts of resources if he wants them. We do everything from resume building to mental health workshops." She paused delicately. "Does your dad know about us?" A short, mirthless laugh escaped Lily. "He's not really into that kind of thing." Harriet exchanged a look with Faye, the unspoken question clear. "Should we try to intervene more directly?" Faye considered Harriet's approach. The support center could be a godsend for men like Colt, but only if they chose it. She turned to Lily. "Your dad's a veteran, which means he's used to being in a structured environment. Sometimes, after service ends, that structure disappears and people look for substitutes. That's probably how he ended up with the Blue Pythons. It gave him a sense of belonging." Lily's face scrunched in frustration. "But it's not real belonging. He's just with them because he doesn't know what else to do." Harriet placed the brochures gently in front of Lily. "Take these home. Show them to him. Tell him we exist. We're just a place to come if he wants to talk to someone who's been in his shoes." Faye added softly, "I know it might feel scary, but you might be the best chance he has to realize there's a different path." Lily nodded, though it was clear she carried the weight of that responsibility. She slid the brochures into her backpack, zipping it up. "I'll try," she whispered. "But he doesn't listen to me like he used to." "Even if he doesn't listen right away, it's a seed planted," Harriet said. "Change doesn't happen overnight, especially for people who've been living a certain way for a long time." She glanced at Faye as if referencing Faye's own journey from active duty to small-town waitress. Suddenly, Lily's phone buzzed. She pulled it from her backpack and glanced at the screen. "That's my dad. He wants me to come out," she said quietly. She slipped from the booth, her big jacket swaying around her slim frame. "Thanks," she told them both, though her expression was still clouded with worry. As Lily left, Harriet sighed and sat down across from Faye. "Poor kid," she murmured. "It breaks my heart to see her so torn." Faye watched Lily push open the diner door, heading to the pickup truck parked outside. "I hate seeing kids pay the price for their parents' choices," she said. "At least she knows about the support center now." "You could bring Colt there yourself," Harriet offered gently, resting her elbows on the table. "A direct invitation from someone he sees as strong might sway him." Faye was hesitant. "I'm not sure he sees me as anything but an enemy right now. I humiliated him in front of his men." "Maybe that's exactly why he'll listen," Harriet said, her eyes bright with possibility. "You proved you're not afraid of him. Sometimes respect starts there. You know that from your own training, right?" Faye nodded slowly, acknowledging the point. She'd seen it happen countless times overseas, combatants who only negotiated once they realized their adversary was not to be trifled with. "I'll think about it," she said, though she still felt a swirl of reluctance in her gut. She wanted a quiet life, far from these entanglements. But was turning Colt away to remain in a downward spiral any better than ignoring a wounded soldier on the battlefield? Harriet studied Faye's conflicted expression. "You're not just a waitress, Faye. You're a force for good." Think about how many lives you could change if you use that skill set here, now, in a different way. Faye sighed, recalling the intensity in Lily's eyes. I'll think about it, she repeated, more firmly this time. The rest of the day at Beverly's diner unfolded with a strained undercurrent. Regulars who'd heard about the previous night's showdown stopped by to get the story from Beverly, though she only offered bits and pieces, enough to satisfy curiosity, but not so much as to invite gossip. Faye kept her head down, focusing on work but occasionally stealing glances out the window, half expecting Colt to appear. He never came inside, but once or twice, she spotted his truck idling across the street, engine running. Whether he was simply watching Lily eat breakfast or gathering the nerve to face his humiliation, she couldn't say. By late afternoon, Harriet returned with news. She whispered it to Faye at the counter, next to the pie display. Lily was at the support center earlier, Harriet said. She came in for a minute while her dad waited outside in the truck. He wouldn't come in, but at least she stepped in to ask some questions on his behalf. Faye felt a swell of admiration for the girl. She's braver than she realizes, she said, wiping down the counter. Any sign he'll turn up himself? Harriet shook her head. I think he's worried about looking weak. That's where you come in, Faye. Faye set down her cleaning rag and exhaled. Harriet's invitation was as clear as day. Go to him, she wrestled internally. Approaching Colt felt like stirring a hornet's nest, but Dex's words kept replaying in her mind. He's different this morning. Never seen him like this. Maybe that vulnerability was a door cracking open. If she didn't nudge it, it might slam shut forever. Finally, around closing time, Faye squared her shoulders. All right, she told Harriet. I'll take a walk over to wherever he's parked. Maybe he's still waiting for Lily to finish at the center or something. If he's there, I'll talk to him. Harriet flashed a hopeful smile. I'll stay here with Beverly. If you need backup. Faye's eyes glinted with wry humor. I'll manage, but thanks. Leaving the diner, Faye felt the crisp Montana evening settling in, the sky streaked with purples and oranges reminiscent of last night's sunset. She walked a few blocks to the Veteran Support Center, an unassuming brick building converted from an old warehouse. Inside, she saw the lights were on, shining through the tall windows. As she neared, her pulse quickened. Parked across the street was a battered old pickup with tinted windows. Colt was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, posture rigid. He noticed Faye right away. She steadied herself and crossed the street, pausing a few feet away. Hey, she called gently, making sure her tone wasn't confrontational. You waiting for Lily? He nodded curtly, his gaze sliding over her but not quite meeting her eyes. She's inside, he said. Wanted to ask those people some questions. Figured I'd let her, at least for now. A swirl of tension clung to the air. Faye could sense Colt's pride warring with his concern for his daughter. She took a step closer, reading his rigid posture. He looked like a coiled spring, ready to snap if he felt cornered. Colt, she began, about last night. His jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to the ground. Let's not pretend it didn't happen, he muttered. You and your diner full of people saw me get put on my ass by someone half my size. Now my own kid won't look at me the same way. Figured I'd never want to see you again. But you're here, Faye pointed out gently. He looked away, running a hand over his shaved head. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. My Lily, she looks at me like I'm the bad guy. Maybe I am, but that... He stopped, swallowing hard. I never wanted my daughter to see me like that. Faye's voice softened. Then maybe it's time for a different path. That building across the street? They help vets. They can help you figure out your next step. Colt snorted, though his eyes betrayed turmoil. I'm not a charity case. I've got responsibilities, a name to uphold in the Blue Pythons. Your daughter's also your responsibility, Faye said, not unkindly. Which name means more to you? Colt, the unstoppable biker, or Dad? Her question hung in the air, neither pushy nor judging, but with genuine curiosity. He didn't answer, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. Some part of him resented her for calling him out, yet another part recognized the truth. He inhaled shakily as if about to speak, but the support center doors swung open and Lily stepped out, clutching a handful of pamphlets. She spotted Faye and managed a small smile, then her gaze landed on Colt. The childlike hope in her eyes was heartbreaking. "Ready to go?" Colt said, clearing his throat. Lily nodded, casting a last glance at Faye. The father and daughter moved to the truck. Before climbing in, Colt paused, turning halfway back to Faye. There was something in his expression, regret, maybe, or gratitude, that flickered and vanished almost instantly. He got in, started the engine, and pulled away. Faye stood there on the curb, the fading evening light casting long shadows across her feet. She couldn't say for certain if she'd made a difference, but Dex was right about one thing. The road Colt was on didn't have a happy ending, unless he found a new direction. Whether that direction included the Veteran Support Center or not was up to him. Yet, in her gut, she felt a seed had been planted. Back at the diner an hour later, Faye found Harriet and Beverly tidying up after the last few customers. She recounted her brief meeting with Colt, explaining how uncertain he seemed, how Lily clutched those pamphlets like they were a lifeline. Harriet listened intently, nodding at key points. "So there's a chance," Harriet concluded. "Men like Colt take time to shift their thinking, but it sounds like the connection with his daughter might be the key." Beverly offered a tired smile. "You did good, hun. He didn't run you off, at least." Faye shrugged. "Let's not break out the champagne yet. He's torn, yes, but he's also entrenched in that MC. Pride and loyalty can be powerful deterrents to change." Harriet patted Faye's shoulder. "But you extended a hand. Sometimes that's enough to start the process. And you never know, maybe Dex is also dropping words in his ear, encouraging him to come see us." A minute later, Mr. Martinez, who had been quietly finishing a piece of pie, approached. "Heard bits of that," he said, nodding at Harriet's comment. "I just want you all to know, if that gang tries anything else, the folks in this town aren't just going to roll over. I may be old, but I still know how to handle a situation or two." He gave Faye a small, approving grin. "Besides, we've got a Delta Force vet, apparently." Faye felt a pang of embarrassment at the reminder that her cover was effectively blown. Still, she mustered a grateful smile. "Thanks, Mr. Martinez. I appreciate the support." He patted her arm lightly. "I was once an idealistic grunt too, you know. Sometimes all it takes is one strong person to show the rest of us that we can stand firm." As he left, Harriet began locking up the diner's main entrance. The soft click of the lock made Faye's shoulders relax slightly. Outside, the Montana sky was a deep navy, stars shimmering in the clear air. She found herself reflecting on Dex's surprising empathy, Lily's unwavering love for her father, and Colt's internal struggle. There was a sense of inevitability that she'd be pulled deeper into this, whether she liked it or not. Beverly stretched her arms overhead, letting out a quiet yawn. "Long day, huh?" she said, rolling her shoulders. "Long couple of days, more like." Faye nodded. "Feels like everything changed in just 24 hours. "Maybe it needed to," Harriet suggested. "A confrontation sometimes jolts people out of complacency, and if there's a chance to steer Colt and his crew toward a better path, maybe that's exactly why you're here." Faye wrapped her arms around herself, feeling both the chill of the night air and the warmth of the diner's fluorescent glow behind her. "I've always believed in protecting those who can't protect themselves," she said. "It's what I did in the military, and it's what I wanted to keep doing in some small way. I just never thought it would look like this." Harriet gave a knowing smile. "Life seldom follows our script, does it? But sometimes the unexpected path is the one where we can do the most good." Beverly stepped in with an arm around Faye's shoulder. "We're with you, kiddo, no matter what happens. This is our town, and we take care of our own." Faye felt her guard loosen, just a fraction. She stared into the darkness beyond the glow of the diner's windows, thinking of Lily, Dex, and even Colt. "Then I guess," she said softly, "it's time to see where this road leads." Faye awoke the following day to the faint glow of dawn filtering through her thin curtains, and she instantly felt the pressure in her chest return. It wasn't fear exactly, but the tense anticipation of someone who'd watched too many standoffs escalate into chaos. Her mind circled around Colt, Lily, and Dex like a restless hawk tracking potential prey. Part of her wanted to forget the entire situation and focus solely on the daily rhythms of Beverly's diner, pouring coffee, serving eggs over easy, and swapping gentle banter with regulars. But Harriet's words and Lily's distressed face from the night before had left a mark she couldn't ignore. She splashed cold water on her face in the cramped bathroom, trying to jolt herself awake. As she wiped her face with a towel, her gaze drifted to the small digital clock on her sink counter. 5:47 a.m. She still had a couple of hours before her shift at the diner. Impulse nudged her to visit Harriet at the Veterans Support Center, which opened early for those who needed morning counseling or a quiet space to regroup. Maybe Harriet would have fresh insights about approaching Colt, or maybe Faye just needed to fill the uneasy silence of her own thoughts with something constructive. Deciding swiftly, she threw on a plain hoodie and stepped into her most comfortable boots. The crisp Montana morning air bit at her cheeks as she descended the rickety steps of her apartment and started the 10-minute walk to the support center. The sun was still a pale circle behind the mountains, leaving the town in a gray hush. The streets nearly empty except for a few pickup trucks that belonged to ranchers starting their long day. When Faye pushed open the heavy door to the converted warehouse, she found Harriet already at the reception desk, flipping through a binder of program schedules. A few early arrivals milled about, mostly veterans sipping coffee while waiting for the day's first group session. Harriet looked up in surprise, and then a welcoming smile spread across her face. "Morning," she said. "Couldn't sleep?" "Something like that," Faye replied, forcing a small smile of her own. "Figured I'd see what the place looks like before the town's fully awake." She glanced around at the rows of folding chairs, the bulletin boards crowded with flyers and resource lists. Pictures of men and women in uniform lined one wall, commemorating local veterans and listing their achievements in tiny frame plaques. Harriet gestured for Faye to join her behind the reception desk, speaking in a lowered voice. "I tried calling Lily's phone last night, just to check in. No answer. Not surprising, maybe Colt told her not to pick up. Or maybe she just needed space." She set aside the binder. "What about you? Did you get any rest?" Faye shrugged. "Enough," she lied. Her sleep had been restless, haunted by flashbacks of old missions merging with new worries about Lily's future. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "You mentioned there might be a female vets group meeting this morning?" A spark of curiosity lit Harriet's eyes. "Yes, in about an hour. You're welcome to sit in. No pressure to share more than you're comfortable with. A lot of the women there have stories about being pulled in multiple directions after service, dealing with everything from PTSD to family reintegration. Might give you some perspective, or at least a sense you're not alone." Faye contemplated Harriet's offer. Opening up about her experiences felt daunting, but she also recognized the potential benefit of hearing others. "I'll think about it," she said, meaning it more than she had before. As she spoke, the front door creaked open, and a cluster of 3 veterans ambled in, exchanging nods and subdued good mornings. Before Harriet could greet them, Faye spoke again, a little quieter. "Any sign of Colt or Dex?" The question hung in the air, laced with cautious hope. "Not yet, but it's early," Harriet replied, giving her a gentle pat on the arm. "Don't worry, I'll let you know if they come around." Faye exhaled, tension rolling off her shoulders in slow waves. If Dex shows up, maybe that means Colt is really considering a change. She paused, eyes flicking to a poster that read, "Reintegration, healing at your own pace. In the meantime, I guess I'll stick around for a bit, see if I can help with anything." She wasn't sure if she was ready to talk openly, but being in this environment, where the air seemed to hum with a readiness to help, already made her feel more anchored. Faye spent the next half hour assisting Harriet with mundane tasks, organizing pamphlets, updating a whiteboard calendar with the month's events, and refilling a coffee dispenser in the modest kitchenette. Simple duties, but in each small act, she caught a glimmer of the disciplined soldier she'd once been. Careful, methodical, ensuring everything was in its proper place. It felt oddly comforting to slip into a supportive role in a space designed to help veterans, even though she'd been avoiding such spaces for years out of fear they would dredge up painful memories. At one point, an older veteran wearing a Vietnam-era cap approached the kitchen. His name tag, from a lanyard handed out at the desk, read Hank. He took a moment to study Faye, squinting as if trying to place her face. "Don't think I've seen you around here before," he said, his tone polite. "Just visiting," Faye replied, handing him a paper cup of coffee. "Name's Faye. Figured I'd help Harriet out for a while." Hank nodded, acceptance in his weathered expression. "Good place to be. Saved my bacon more times than I can count." especially on the nights I almost gave up. He took a slow sip, exhaled, then ambled off toward a cluster of chairs where a few other men were gathering for the first session of the day. Faye felt a flicker of warmth. Places like this really did matter. Harriet stepped into the kitchenette carrying a box of new flyers. That was Hank Barnes, she explained with a fond smile. He's a bit of a fixture here, helped us set up our addiction recovery program. You wouldn't believe how many folks he's guided back from the brink. Faye nodded and her eyes drifted to the window, scanning the street almost reflexively. She froze upon spotting a familiar face coming down the sidewalk. Dex. He had his helmet under one arm and approached the front doors of the center with slow steps, like he wasn't entirely sure he should be there. A bloom of cautious anticipation tightened Faye's stomach. Through the window, Dex hesitated, looking up at the sign that read, Rockfield Veteran Outreach Center. Then he pushed the door open, stepping inside. Harriet's eyes widened in recognition, and Faye followed her out into the reception area. Hey, Dex began, clearing his throat awkwardly. He tapped the emblem on his vest, a coiled snake with Blue Python MC stitched beneath it. Several men in the waiting area glanced his way, some with curiosity, others with open wariness. But Dex raised a hand in a peaceable gesture. I'm not here to cause trouble. Promise. It's okay, Harriet said, though her tone was cautious. We're open to any veteran. No judgments. Dex relaxed marginally. He turned to Faye, offering a nod. I came by because, well, Colt's still at a crossroads. He hasn't said it directly, but I think he's waiting for a sign, something to tip him toward actually stepping in here instead of circling the block like a lost dog. Faye's gaze flickered. He's outside now? Shaking his head, Dex removed his vest and held it awkwardly at his side, perhaps trying to appear less intimidating. Nah, not here. He's at the clubhouse, pacing. Lily's at school. I told him I needed to stop by the hardware store, but I was really coming here. Didn't want him to think I was pushing him too hard. He cast a glance around, taking in the facility, rows of chairs, photos on bulletin boards, tables with job application forms. You were right. This place is more than I expected. I can see how it might actually help. Harriet seized the moment. We've got counseling sessions for trauma, help with career transitions, group therapy for vets dealing with aggression or anger issues. If Colt or any of your MC members want to talk about their experiences, they'd be welcome. She paused. We also have a mechanical skills workshop on Fridays. Some of our folks teach engine repair basics. That might be a way to ease them in. Dex raised his eyebrows at that. Engine repair, huh? Most of our guys are gearheads. They love tinkering with bikes and cars. If we can frame it less like therapy and more like a skill exchange, maybe that's an angle Colt would be open to. A faint spark lit in Faye's eyes. That's a really good idea, she said, imagining a group of rough-and-tumble bikers working alongside veterans in a communal garage, sharing mechanical tips while forging an unexpected sense of belonging. Better than trying to shove group therapy down their throats. Harriet quickly jotted down a note. Mechanical skills session, Fridays 2 p.m. We can rename it a community skills exchange or something. We'll keep the official counseling optional for anyone who wants it afterward. Dex ran a palm across his short-cropped hair. Yeah, that might actually work. If you don't mind, I'll bring a couple of the guys over next Friday to check it out. I doubt Colt will come the first time, but once he hears it's about bikes, maybe he'll loosen up. He eyed Faye, eyes glinting with subtle gratitude. Thanks for not judging, and for planting the idea in Lily's head that this place could help him. She's been pushing him, gently, ever since. Faye felt a quiet sense of relief. Something constructive was taking shape, a channel for the Blue Python MC to see a different future. It was a far cry from guaranteed success, but it was a start. By mid-morning, Faye found herself back at Beverly's diner, this time with a lighter heart. The conversation with Dex had confirmed that seeds of change were taking root, even if they were still fragile. She hung her hoodie on a peg by the kitchen door and slipped into her standard waitress uniform. White blouse, black slacks, and a simple apron. Beverly teased her that the uniform made her look too serious, but Faye didn't mind. Old habits of neatness and discipline gave her a sense of calm. The lunch rush began to build around 11:30, as it often did when the local shops and small businesses took their midday break. Faye moved between tables with that familiar, fluid efficiency, refilling coffee cups, sliding plates of sandwiches and fries onto laminated tablecloths, and tossing smiles to the regulars. A subdued hum of conversation floated across the diner, punctuated by laughter here and there. Still, a noticeable shift had occurred. Patrons who had previously regarded Faye as just a polite, if somewhat reserved, waitress now saw her through a lens of heightened respect, one that bordered on awe. She caught snippets of hushed remarks. Delta Force, who knew? And did you see that video floating around? Some biker posted it online. The details of the scuffle evidently had circulated faster than the local rumor mill. Faye found the attention unnerving. She'd always preferred blending into being in the spotlight. Between serving dishes, she paused at Mr. Martinez's table. The Korean War veteran was still a bit rattled from the earlier showdown, but he gave her a friendly nod. "Heard about that mechanical workshop you're trying to set up at the support center," he said, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sounds like a decent approach." Faye nodded, setting down a bowl of soup in front of him. "Harriet and Dex came up with the plan. I'm hoping Colt might check it out eventually." Mr. Martinez sipped his soup, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Well, I'll tell you one thing. This town's seen its share of trouble from outsiders over the years, especially bikers passing through. People here might not trust them as quick as you do. So if you plan to help them settle in, you'll need the community on your side." "Trust me, I'm aware," Faye sighed. "But from what Dex said, a bunch of the Blue Python guys are veterans. They just lost their way after service." "Losing your way doesn't excuse terrorizing a diner," Mr. Martinez muttered, though not unkindly. "But it can explain some of it." He took another spoonful of soup. "Sometimes you get pushed out of the military pipeline and land nowhere, so you latch onto the first group that gives you a sense of belonging." Faye mulled that over. "If we can redirect that belonging into something positive, like helping other vets or learning job skills, they might leave the intimidation tactics behind." Beverly breezed over, her arms holding a stack of clean plates. "Talking about your biker friends?" she asked, half teasing. Faye mustered a small smile. "We're talking about the possibility that they won't stay biker thugs forever." Beverly set the plates down with a firm thud, eyeing Faye. "Just be careful. Folks in town might not be so quick to see them as a harmless motorcycle club. A few already called me this morning, saying they hope these guys are just passing through." Faye shrugged. "I get that, but maybe we can show them a different side. Once the community sees that some of them are veterans too, it might open a door to acceptance." Mr. Martinez gave a low grunt. "Or it might spark deeper resentment if they think the club is exploiting the veteran label for sympathy. Tread carefully, Faye." Faye nodded, appreciating the caution. She then excused herself to check on a newly arrived customer at table 6. Inside her chest, a quiet determination grew. "It's worth trying," she repeated in her mind. If she could help even one of these men avoid the destructive spiral of post-service life, maybe that would be the redemption she sought for her own ghosts. Around 3 in the afternoon, just as the diner's after-lunch lull set in, Lily stepped inside. Faye noticed the girl immediately. She seemed more subdued than before, wearing a hoodie over jeans and carrying a worn-out backpack. Lily scanned the diner with anxious eyes until she found Faye. Approaching the counter, she offered a shy wave. "Want to sit?" Faye asked, nodding toward an empty stool. Lily climbed up, setting her backpack at her feet. Beverly, noticing her presence, flashed a concerned look to Faye, who answered with a subtle nod that seemed to say, "I'll handle this." Lily's lips pressed together. "Dad said he might come by after he finishes something at the clubhouse." She fiddled with a paper pamphlet in her hand, one of Harriet's. "He keeps picking it up, putting it down, and then pacing around." "That's progress?" Faye ventured gently. "Sort of," Lily agreed, glancing around to ensure no one could overhear. "He said he hates feeling weak, but I told him it's not about weakness or strength. It's about finding a healthy way to be dad again." Then he shut himself in the garage for an hour. She exhaled a quivering breath. "I'm trying, but I'm only 12. He doesn't exactly take advice from me." Faye felt a pang of sympathy. "Sounds like he's listening more than you think, if he's actually reading Harriet's pamphlets." She reached for the coffee carafe but thought better of it for Lily. Instead, she grabbed a soda from the fridge beneath the counter and set it in front of the girl. Lily gave a small, grateful smile before popping the soda open. It's just, I remember when he taught motorcycle safety. He was kind and patient. I don't know if he can go back to that person after being in the MC. People change, yes, but they can change again, Faye replied softly. Trust me, I've seen it happen. She thought of her own transformation from a hardened operator to a quiet waitress. If she could shift gears, maybe Colt could too. The bell over the diner door chimed, drawing both their gazes. Colt stepped inside, shoulders stiff under his leather jacket. His eyes zeroed in on Lily at the counter, then flicked to Faye. This time, instead of aggression, there was an awkward uncertainty in his stance. Several patrons tensed, but Colt didn't speak to them. He simply walked over to where Lily perched on the stool. Hey, kid, he said in a gruff undertone. Lily hopped off to stand beside him. He rested a large hand on her shoulder, a gesture that might have been comforting if not for the visible tension in his arm. Dad? Lily answered, letting the pamphlet slip back into her backpack. She glanced at Faye as if to say, here we go. Colt cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably under the curious stares from the remaining patrons. Could we talk somewhere that's not so crowded? He avoided looking at Beverly or Mr. Martinez. Faye caught Beverly's eye. Beverly gave a subtle nod of permission, an unspoken sign that she'd hold down the fort. Faye hung up her apron, gesturing for Colt and Lily to follow her outside. Once on the sidewalk, they stepped into the narrow alley between the diner and the hardware store, away from prying eyes. The air smelled faintly of garbage from a dumpster at the far end, but it was quiet at least. Faye turned to face Colt, her demeanor calm but firm. Lily hovered at her father's side, gazing up at him with a blend of hope and apprehension. Colt spoke first. I've been thinking about what you said, and about Lily's input too, about the center and Harriet's programs. He let out a rough exhale. I don't want Lily seeing me as a villain, but the MC is all I have right now. Most of the guys serve too, so it feels like a brotherhood. Faye nodded. A brotherhood can be redefined. If those same guys realize they can be a brotherhood without doing things that scare and harm people, that's progress. And if they're veterans, Harriet's place could be exactly what you all need. Colt ran a hand over his face, jaw tight. Lily wants me to do this engine repair thing they're talking about, like a skill exchange. I said I'd think about it. That's all I can promise right now. Lily squeezed his arm. It's on Friday, Dad. Just show up. You don't even have to talk about your feelings or whatever. Just teach them about bikes like you used to at the college. Her eyes glimmered. Remember how proud I was when I saw you teaching a class full of people who knew nothing about engines? You told me knowledge is power. A flicker of pain crossed Colt's face, like remembering that time stung more than it soothed. Yet he nodded slowly, glancing at Faye. Would you be there? He asked, voice low. Faye paused, considering. She wasn't sure if diving deeper into this dynamic was wise, but seeing Lily's expression, full of guarded optimism, made her answer for her. Yes, I'll be there, she replied. If it'll help, I'll make sure Harriet sets everything up so it's relaxed. No pressure. Fine, Colt said, slipping his hand off Lily's shoulder. I'll give it one try. If I don't like it, I'm out. The softness in Lily's eyes betrayed her relief. Faye allowed herself a tiny smile. It was a small step, yes, but it was something. No sooner had Faye walked back into the diner than a wave of tension greeted her. A few regulars had apparently caught sight of Colt through the windows and didn't like what they saw. Murmurs spread among the tables about the biker who threatened everyone, returning to the scene, setting the town's rumor mill spinning again. Beverly met Faye near the register, her expression cautious. How'd it go out there? Faye shrugged. He's on the fence, but Lily's pushing him to come to the engine repair workshop at the support center on Friday. Beverly let out a soft sigh. That's good, I guess. But some folks here aren't too happy he walked in like he owns the place. A few even mentioned they might call the sheriff if they see him again. Faye's gaze traveled over the patrons, some of whom avoided her eyes. A couple gave her thin-lipped nods, respect for her, but none for Colt. She could feel a collective bristle in the air. I understand their fear, she admitted. He did scare a lot of people. But if we're going to help him change, maybe we need to give him a chance. Beverly angled her head, lips pressing together. Not everyone's as forgiving as you, Faye. They didn't see the guilt in Colt's eyes or the way Lily pleaded with him. They just remember last night's near brawl. Before Faye could respond, Harriet walked in carrying a stack of bright green flyers. She must have hurried from the support center because she was slightly out of breath. Spotting Faye and Beverly, she strode over to them. "I heard Colt showed up?" she asked, voice pitched low, mindful of the eavesdroppers at nearby tables. Faye nodded. He agreed to come to the engine repair session on Friday. Harriet's eyes brightened. "That's fantastic. If he shows, Dex might bring the rest. This could be a huge step in bridging the gap between them and the community." She waved the flyers. "I made these to advertise the workshop. Community skill share, motorcycle and engine basics. Figured we'd invite local mechanics too. Make it less about therapy, more about education." Beverly's eyebrows rose at the idea. That might entice local gearheads, sure, but might also bring in folks who are suspicious of the Blue Pythons and want to confront them. Harriet hesitated. "I can't control how people react. All I can do is set the stage for a positive interaction. We do have a few volunteers who are ex-law enforcement, so there will be some extra eyes in case things get heated." Faye rubbed her temples. "Maybe that's for the best, some measure of security so nobody tries anything rash." Meanwhile, a middle-aged man named Ron Wilkins, who ran the local hardware store next door, approached them. He was wiping his hands on a shop rag, apparently having just closed up early. "Heard the biker was back," Ron said, glancing warily at the door. "You sure it's safe for him to be around here, Faye? I got 2 calls from concerned neighbors about it." Faye mustered patience. "He was only here to talk to his daughter. He's not going to harass anyone right now." Ron frowned. Right now doesn't mean he won't revert. The hush around them seemed to intensify as more people tuned in. Harriet stepped forward, offering one of her flyers. "We're giving them an off-ramp," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "A way to redirect their energy. I know it's scary, but we'd rather they become productive members of the community than remain hostile outsiders." Ron scanned the flyer skeptically. "Motorcycle workshop, huh? And you expect them to just turn over a new leaf? I'm not so sure." Beverly placed a hand on Ron's shoulder. "Let's at least see if they show up. If they do, maybe that means they're serious about changing." Ron looked unconvinced, but took the flyer anyway, jamming it into his back pocket. "Just don't want trouble in our town is all." With that, he walked out, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. Harriet exchanged a glance with Faye. "We'll have to double our efforts to reassure folks. The last thing we need is some vigilante deciding to teach the bikers a lesson." Faye sighed. "So I guess the next few days are about damage control and building trust." She could almost feel the weight of that task on her shoulders, reminiscent of negotiations with hostile local militias in foreign lands. Only this time it was in her own backyard, with a small-town community that prided itself on safety and neighborly values. Over the next few days, Harriet and Faye coordinated the logistics for the Friday workshop, determined to turn a simple engine repair demo into a gateway for broader acceptance. They posted flyers around town, on bulletin boards at the grocery store, the library, and even at the local gas station. Some were torn down within hours, a sign of lingering resentment or fear, but enough remained to spark interest. Meanwhile, Dex kept in touch sporadically, updating Faye on the situation within the Blue Python MC. He mentioned that several members, those who had also served or who were genuinely tired of petty crime, were intrigued by the idea of a workshop. "They miss feeling useful," Dex confided over the phone one evening. "Fixing bikes for a good cause might scratch that itch." Faye had also heard rumors that not everyone in the MC was on board. A few hardcore members saw Colt's hesitation as weakness and had begun grumbling about new leadership. Dex confirmed this. "There's a guy named Royce came into the club a couple of months ago bringing in heavier stuff, like running contraband through the mountains. He's been pushing Colt to be more aggressive, show no weakness. If this workshop idea fails, Royce might capitalize on the morale drop and take over." That revelation left Faye's stomach churning with worry. If Colt lost his tenuous grip on leadership, the entire club could pivot toward more violent or criminal activities. Helping them was more urgent than ever, not just for Colt's sake or Lily's, but for the town's safety. On Thursday night, Faye prepped at the support center, assisting Harriet in setting up a large garage bay that had previously been used for storing donated vehicles. They cleared out old boxes and arranged tool racks and folding tables. Harriet had invited a local mechanic named Neil, a gentle giant of a man with thick arms and a bushy beard, to help demonstrate various engine parts. Faye tested the overhead lights and reorganized a few tool chests, noticing how these simple tasks unleashed a sense of calm in her mind. Feels a bit like setting up for a mission, she joked to Harriet at one point, gesturing to the carefully arranged wrenches and socket sets. Harriet nodded. We want them to walk in and see we're serious. This isn't just a bait and switch therapy session. We genuinely want to share knowledge and learn from them too. If they sense sincerity, maybe they'll let their guard down. When they finally finished late in the evening, Harriet locked up the center and the two women walked out into the cool night air. The overhead street lamps buzzed faintly. You think Colt will actually show? Harriet asked, rubbing her arms. It's a big step, public too. Faye looked up at the stars, reminiscent of her time on night patrols, where the sky was sometimes her only comfort. I think Lily will make sure he does. Whether he stays or not might depend on how he's greeted. Harriet brushed a strand of hair from her face. Let's hope the community we invited shows up in the right spirit then. Otherwise, it could turn ugly fast. As Faye drove back to her apartment, her mind lingered on the array of possible outcomes. Best case, the MC members find renewed purpose, forging a bond with local veterans. Worst case, tensions erupt, someone calls the police, or even violence breaks out, undoing all the progress they'd made. She parked, climbed her steps, and locked the door behind her, forcing herself to do a brief meditation she'd learned in the military. Slow, deliberate breaths, counting each inhale and exhale, visualizing calm. She pictured Lily, Dex, Harriet, Beverly, and even Colt, each a piece of a precarious puzzle that might come together into something whole if handled carefully. One step at a time, she whispered to the darkness of her living room. Then she flicked on a small lamp, sat on her couch, and tried to summon enough mental peace to rest. Tomorrow was a pivotal day. Friday morning dawned with a bright sky, the Montana sun beaming over the foothills. Faye woke early, her nerves alight with both excitement and apprehension. She checked the clock, 6 a.m. She had a few hours before heading to the diner for a shorter shift. Beverly had agreed to let her clock out around noon so she could prepare for the workshop. Faye decided a run would clear her head, so she donned running shoes and jogged through the still sleepy streets. As she ran, she noted the subtle changes around town. A few of Harriet's green flyers still clung to telephone poles or public notice boards, but now some had handwritten scrawls over them. Watch out, or MC not welcome. She frowned, picking up the pace. The pushback was real, and that meant tensions could skyrocket if not carefully managed. By the time Faye arrived for her abbreviated shift at Beverly's diner, she was perspiring lightly but felt mentally alert. The regular breakfast crowd was in full swing, farmers, shopkeepers, and a smattering of passers-by. Beverly greeted Faye with an encouraging nod, handing her an apron. It's going to be a busy morning, so let's get to it, she said. An hour into the shift, Dex showed up unexpectedly, wearing a plain jacket instead of his leather vest. He slid into a booth near the counter. Faye hurried over, worried something might have gone wrong. Hey, everything okay? She asked quietly so the nearby tables wouldn't overhear. Dex gave a half smile. Just wanted to let you know Colt's definitely coming. 2 p.m. time with Lily and a couple of the guys. But there's talk that Royce and his buddies might show up separately, either to sabotage or to watch Colt make a fool of himself. Faye felt a prickle of alarm. If they were there to provoke a fight, that could ruin everything. Dex shrugged, eyes flicking around. Yeah, but if we run from it, that cements Colt's downfall as leader. If we stand up to them, peacefully, I hope, maybe we prove something. Gotta see how it plays out. She took a deep breath. Well, Harriet's got some volunteers ready to intervene if things get heated, and I'll be there. Dex nodded, relief coloring his features. Thanks. He pulled out his wallet, fishing for a few bills. I'll grab a coffee to go, if you don't mind. Faye returned a minute later with a to-go cup, refusing his cash. On the house, she said. voice steady with sincerity. We're all in this together now. Dex offered a faint grin of gratitude, slid out of the booth, and left. Faye watched him go, her stomach fluttering with a fresh wave of nerves. She poured herself into the rest of her shift, carrying plates of bacon and eggs, refilling coffee mugs, and forcing a smile whenever a customer asked if she was ready for the big event. Finally, noon arrived. Beverly, sensing Faye's anxious energy, urged her to clock out. "Get out of here, hun," she said. "Harriet probably needs all the help she can get." Faye peeled off her apron, snatched her bag, and made for the door. "Wish us luck." Beverly nodded gravely. "Good luck and be careful." The words lingered as Faye hurried across town to the support center. She arrived to find Harriet directing volunteers, while local mechanic Neil carefully rolled a large tool chest into the freshly cleared garage space. About half a dozen veterans milled around, some looking excited, others wary. Faye pitched in immediately, taping up signage that read, "Community Skill Share," and "No smoking, please." "Any word on who else is showing?" Faye asked Harriet, wiping sweat from her brow. The day was unseasonably warm, or maybe it was just the adrenaline. Harriet consulted a list on her clipboard. "We've had calls from a few curious townspeople. Also, some ex-police officers said they'd come by to show support and possibly keep the peace." She glanced at the clock, 1:50 p.m. "We're almost there." Faye scanned the bright-lit space once more, trying to picture how the next couple of hours might unfold. Best-case scenario, MC members filter in, see the layout, talk shop with local veterans, and inch closer to acceptance. Worst-case scenario, she didn't let herself linger on that. She just prepared mentally, as she used to do before missions. At exactly 2 o'clock, the rumble of motorcycles filtered through the large open doors of the garage. Everyone in the workshop paused, looking toward the entrance. Faye's pulse kicked up, and she glanced at Harriet, who gave her a reassuring nod. Neil wiped his hands on a rag, setting aside a carburetor he'd been prepping for demonstration. Colt appeared first, riding a modest black cruiser, followed by Lily on the back seat. Behind him rumbled 2 more bikes, each carrying a single rider. One was Dex, the other a man Faye didn't recognize. Tall, lean, with a face that looked permanently set in a scowl. Colt parked his bike near the entrance and dismounted. Lily hopped off, taking off her helmet and clutching it nervously. Conversation in the garage dipped to a hush as the newcomer stepped onto the cement floor. Harriet approached them with a friendly smile. "Welcome," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Harriet Winston, coordinator here. Really glad you could make it." Colt eyed her handshake, but shook it, if a bit stiffly. Lily lingered beside her father, scanning the faces around them. Dex offered a casual salute to Faye, who returned it with a small wave. The scowling man behind them crossed his arms over his chest, glancing at the crowd with visible distrust. Faye decided to step forward. "Colt, Lily, Dex, and—" She trailed off, eyes on the 4th man. "Rufus," he grunted, not offering a handshake. "Just here to observe." Colt cleared his throat. "We're here to see what this is all about. Maybe share some knowledge on engine modifications." Despite his attempts at bravado, there was tension in his posture. Neil, the mechanic, grinned broadly and wiped oil-stained hands on his coveralls. "Engines are engines, you know. We've got a few bike parts laid out. If you guys want to jump in and show us your methods, we'd love to learn." He gestured to the tables. "I'll teach you some of what I know. You teach me some of what you know. Sound good?" Dex's face lit with genuine interest. "Yeah, actually, we do a lot of custom builds in our clubhouse garage. Might be cool to compare notes." Rufus, arms still crossed, let out a skeptical, but didn't leave. Colt shot him a glare, then turned back to Neil. "Sure, let's take a look." With that, the tension loosened a notch as Neil led Colt, Dex, and Rufus toward the main work area. Lily stayed back, eyeing the room. Faye caught her expression, equal parts worry and relief. She gently touched Lily's shoulder. "Want a soda or something? We have a refreshment table in the corner." Lily nodded eagerly, perhaps glad to have something to do that wasn't standing awkwardly beside the men. Faye guided her to the refreshment table, where Harriet had set out coffee, water, and snacks. As Lily grabbed a soda, a few local veterans ventured closer to the bikers. They asked questions about the engine parts, checking out the club's approach to customizing bikes. At first, the conversation was guarded, Short replies, minimal eye contact. But after a few minutes, Dex and Neil started animatedly debating the pros and cons of a particular carburetor design, drawing in the older vets. Colt joined in with a few of his own insights, dropping the guarded posture as he talked about torque and horsepower. Faye watched from the sidelines, heartened to see them engaging. Even Harriet beamed, scanning the room to make sure no trouble brewed. Rufus, though still surly, occasionally offered a grunt of acknowledgement or correction, proving he knew a thing or two about engines. Then a new sound cut through the workshop chatter, the roar of more motorcycles arriving outside. Faye's stomach clenched. Sure enough, 3 additional bikes pulled up, one of them sporting a large, ominous figure on top, likely Royce. The men dismounted, removing their helmets with grim purpose. Harriet and Faye exchanged worried looks. Dex noticed them too, his jaw tensing. He stepped away from the table, moving to intercept the newcomers. Colt recognized them and exhaled quietly, as if steeling himself. Lily, sensing the shift, edged closer to Faye, who put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," Faye whispered, even though she wasn't entirely certain of that. Royce, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, marched into the garage flanked by 2 men who wore their aggression like a second skin. They all sported the Blue Python MC patches, though with different insignias that suggested a more recent alliance. Their expressions dared anyone to challenge their presence. Dex gave a curt nod. "Royce, didn't think you'd come." Royce smirked. Couldn't pass up the chance to see this circus in person. He swept his gaze over the workshop, lingering on the tables of engine parts and the local volunteers milling about. Then his eyes landed on Colt, who was standing next to Neil. "You playing teacher's pet now, Colt? Teaching these small-town folks how to fix their lawnmowers?" Colt's nostrils flared, but he kept his voice level. "It's called bridging a gap, Royce. Thought you weren't interested." "Oh, I'm interested all right," Royce said, his smirk widening into a sneer, interested in seeing how low the mighty can fall. He took a few steps forward, scanning the crowd. Some of the older veterans bristled at his tone. Harriet moved discreetly to the side, positioning herself near the phone, just in case. Lily shrank behind Faye, gripping her soda can so tightly her knuckles turned white. Faye gently placed her free hand over Lily's, steadying her. She recognized this dynamic, an alpha personality trying to dominate the scene. Instinctively, she stepped forward, placing herself in Royce's line of sight. "Nobody's falling," she stated calmly. "We're here to share skills and help each other out." Royce's gaze snapped to Faye, his eyes narrowing. "You that waitress who humiliated Colt?" "Heard rumors." Faye felt the collective hush draping the workshop. She stood firm. "I'm the waitress, yes. As for humiliating Colt, that was never my goal. He started a confrontation. I ended it. That's all." Royce's lip curled. "Well, I guess if he can't handle one waitress, it makes sense he's in here playing nice with a bunch of nobodies." He jerked his head at Colt. "You should be out showing strength, not hobnobbing with locals who hate us." Dex stepped in, voice firm but measured. "They don't hate us, Royce. They're cautious. We're trying to build a better name for the Blue Pythons. Help folks realize we're more than muscle and intimidation." Royce let out a bark of laughter. "Speak for yourself. My brand of the Blue Pythons doesn't need acceptance. We take what we want. If Colt's turning soft, maybe it's time we pick a new leader." A ripple of tension passed through the workshop. Even Harriet, who normally exuded calm, looked alarmed. A few veterans started edging toward the corners, some quietly muttering about whether they should call the sheriff. Faye locked eyes with Colt. His expression was a tumult of anger, shame, and something else that might have been fear. For Lily, for what Royce's challenge meant. Faye cleared her throat and spoke up, her voice echoing just enough to command attention. "Leaders who can't adapt or protect their own don't last. Colt's stepping into a space where he can protect his daughter, his community, and still maintain the camaraderie you all crave. What are you protecting, Royce, your pride or your people?" Royce's sneer faltered momentarily, but he quickly replaced it with a scoff. "I protect what's mine, and I'm not turning into a teacher's assistant for a bunch of unemployed ex-soldiers." One of the older veterans, Hank, the Vietnam vet Faye had met at the center, stepped forward now, posture surprisingly steady for a man his age. "We're not unemployed, son. Some of us are just retired from one war, not looking to start another. If you've served, you'd know how important it is to find a positive mission once you're back on home soil. Royce locked eyes with Hank, lips parted as though ready for a scathing retort, but something about the older man's unwavering gaze held him at bay. Dex seized the moment to intervene. Look, if you don't want to be here, nobody's forcing you, but Colt does, and so do we. So either watch quietly or get out. For a second, it seemed like Royce might explode, but then he forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Fine, he said, turning away. We'll watch. And when this all falls apart, don't come crying to me for help. The group parted as Royce and his two goons moved to a corner, arms crossed, scowls etched into their faces. Colt exhaled, shoulders sagging slightly. Lily breathed out in relief. Harriet quickly signaled the volunteers to remain calm and carry on. Neil, ever the optimist, clapped his hands. Okay, folks, let's get back to talking engines. He turned to Colt with forced cheer. You were about to show me that trick for checking compression levels, right? Colt nodded, glancing at Royce but returning his focus to the workshop. Yeah, sure. He moved back to the table, Lily now standing beside him protectively. Faye hovered a few feet away, feeling the tension simmer like a pot that could boil over at any moment. Still, the workshop continued, at least for now, with the promise of bridging that gap as tenuous as a frayed wire. Despite the charged atmosphere, the next hour managed to unfold without outright conflict. The participants resumed focusing on engine components in mechanical demonstrations, though the air was thick with the knowledge that Royce and his men stood in the corner, silently judging every move. Yet something interesting began to happen. As Colt explained a clever technique for adjusting valve timing, a technique he'd learned during a stint teaching at the local community college, some of the veterans leaned in, genuinely curious. That's slick, Neil commented, adjusting his glasses as he watched Colt walk through the steps. Never tried that angle before. Might save a lot of wear on older parts. A younger veteran named David nodded vigorously. I've worked on my dad's old Harley for years, but I never thought to do it like that. Thanks, man. Colt blinked, seemingly taken aback by the straightforward appreciation. His glance drifted to Lily, who gave him an encouraging smile. Faye observed this from a short distance, feeling a swell of cautious optimism. For the first time in possibly years, Colt was receiving respect for something other than intimidation or rank in the MC. Meanwhile, Dex struck up a side conversation with Hank, who asked about Dex's military background. Dex admitted he'd served in Afghanistan, 2 tours in the infantry, before returning home to an aimless life. Hank recounted tales from his own war era. While the generational gap was significant, the shared thread of military experience formed a bridge. They laughed over the stubbornness of older equipment, from M16 rifles that jammed to bikes that sputtered on rough terrain. Harriet discreetly circulated among the participants, offering refreshments and stepping in whenever a question about the support center arose. She gave the bullet point version of their programs: group therapy, job placement, peer counseling. Some of the MC members huffed dismissively at the mention of counseling, but a few listened, especially those with older injuries or stories of nightmares they couldn't quite shake. Royce and his 2 companions remained mostly silent, though they occasionally exchanged low remarks that Faye couldn't fully hear. She could guess the gist. Colt is going soft, this is a waste of time, and so on. But notably, they hadn't sabotaged anything yet. Perhaps Royce was testing Colt's resolve, seeing if Colt would cave under the disapproval. Faye moved closer to Harriet, who had just finished talking to a local policeman turned volunteer. So far, so good, she whispered. No blow-ups. Harriet nodded, wiping her forehead. It's tense, but we're getting there. She motioned to Lily and Colt, standing side by side at the demonstration table. Lily was beaming quietly, handing tools to her father as he explained each step. That's probably the best advertisement we could ask for, father and daughter connecting over something constructive. Faye's gaze drifted across the room. It still felt like a high-wire act. One misstep, especially from Royce, could plunge them all into conflict. But each minute that passed without incident was a minute closer to forging a real connection. She found her mind drifting to how she'd learned local languages during her deployments, how exchanging a skill, like repairing a well or teaching first aid, softened barriers that politics alone couldn't break. Maybe in its own small way, this workshop was performing a similar function. She took a moment to grab water from the refreshment table, sipping as she scanned for potential trouble. Royce glared at her, that sneer still plastered on his face. Faye held his gaze for a second, then politely nodded. He offered no nod back, but he also didn't escalate. We'll take what we can get, Faye thought. Then Harriet clapped her hands, drawing attention. We're going to wrap up the formal engine demonstration in about 5 minutes, folks. After that, we'll have an open discussion about any projects you want to tackle or skills you want to learn. Feel free to pair up with someone you met here today. Swapping knowledge is the name of the game. Colt finished his demonstration, stepping back from the table while Neil murmured thanks. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed at a makeshift bulletin board Harriet had set up near the exit, filled with info on upcoming sessions. Colt hesitated, then nodded, letting Lily guide him over to read the pinned flyers. Faye watched them with a sense of renewed hope. She had no illusions that a single workshop could undo years of anger and intimidation. But it was a start. Maybe the biggest challenge now was to ensure Royce didn't undermine the progress. The lull after the demonstration allowed people to mingle, compare notes, and make new connections. Colt awkwardly answered a few more questions from the veterans, who seemed genuinely impressed with his mechanical know-how. Lily hovered proudly, occasionally chiming in with a quick anecdote about how he'd fixed her scooter or their old family car back in the day. Off to the side, Dex shared a spirited discussion about bike modifications with a younger Marine vet. Rufus had surprisingly joined them, though he still kept a guarded expression. It was almost easy to forget that Royce and his cronies stood quietly in the corner, sour expressions unchanging. Easy to forget until one of Royce's men, a wiry fellow with a skeletal face, approached a table where a female volunteer was stacking brochures. Something about his body language set off alarm bells in Faye's mind. He sidled up too close, leaning in with a sneer she could practically feel from across the room. Sure enough, the volunteer, a middle-aged woman named Lorraine, froze when she noticed him looming. Lorraine tried to step away, but the wiry man blocked her with a sideways movement. Faye was too far to hear their words, but she recognized harassment when she saw it. The man's grin was predatory, and Lorraine's face paled. Faye moved in swiftly, weaving through the crowd. She planted herself between the man and Lorraine, meeting his gaze head-on. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her tone firm. He shot her a vicious smirk. "Just making conversation, lady. Not against the law." Lorraine stepped back, relief washing over her. "He wouldn't let me pass," she explained in a trembling voice. Faye didn't blink. Her posture was calm but commanding, legs slightly apart, arms at her sides, ready for anything. She could feel Harriet's presence not far behind, likely alerting the volunteer ex-officers. "We don't corner people here," Faye stated. "If you want to have a polite conversation, that's one thing. But this is not polite." The wiry man's smirk twisted into a sneer. "You're telling me how to talk to people now? Maybe you forgot your place. You're just a waitress." Faye's eyes narrowed. "I'm also part of the reason your crew didn't end up behind bars after that diner stunt. Show some respect." He chuckled darkly. Behind him, Royce and the other man started moving closer, drawn by the confrontation like vultures to a carcass. In Faye's peripheral vision, she saw Dex snap his head up, worry creasing his brow. Colt noticed too, but Lily was tugging at his jacket, trying to get him to intervene. The tension coalesced like storm clouds. The wiry man seemed to relish the standoff, stepping closer. "Respect's earned," he said, voice low. "Don't think you have it yet." Before the situation could escalate further, a small group of ex-police volunteers stepped up, forming a loose half-circle behind Faye. Harriet joined them, her voice clear. "Sir, you're free to leave if you can't keep it civil." Royce sauntered up, crossing his arms. "Seems your workshop's not so welcoming after all," he said to Harriet, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Then he looked at Faye. "Always playing the hero, aren't you?" Faye felt her heart pound, but she refused to back down. "No, but I'll defend anyone who's being harassed." Colt finally pushed through the crowd, Lily at his side. His eyes blazed with anger, though Faye wasn't sure if it was aimed at her or at Royce's men. "Knock it off," Colt snapped at the wiry man. We came here to fix bikes, not cause trouble. Dex chimed in, tension lining his face. Don't drag us all down, man. We're trying something new. Get on board or get out. The wiry biker scoffed, taking a step back. Whatever. He flicked a dismissive glance at Faye, then turned to Royce. I say we've seen enough. Royce leveled Colt with a cold stare. You can stay and play house if you want, but we're done. He turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, his men following. The wiry one spat on the ground before leaving, a final gesture of disrespect. Tension crackled in the garage. Faye exhaled slowly, her muscles coiled like springs. She half expected a last-minute confrontation, but Royce and his goons merely mounted their bikes, revved their engines, and tore off into the distance. As the noise of the departing motorcycles faded, an uneasy stillness settled. Several volunteers stood in stunned silence. Colt's jaw worked, as if he were chewing on the bitter taste of his diminishing authority among certain club members. Lily clung to his arm, her face etched with concern. Neil cleared his throat. Well, that was eventful, he said softly. Let's focus on what we can still do here. Harriet nodded, stepping up to reassure the group. Right, let's regroup, folks. This workshop is still open for anyone who wants to keep learning and sharing. Colt nodded in agreement, though his eyes glimmered with tension. He looked at Faye for a moment, as if searching for some validation. She offered a brief nod, one that said, I've got your back if you keep this path. Lily squeezed his hand. You okay, Dad? He inhaled and exhaled once more, then spoke quietly. Yeah, let's finish what we started. The final half hour of the workshop proceeded in a more subdued fashion. Some of the local townspeople had left, uneasy after seeing Royce's hostility. But the ones who stayed, mostly veterans and a handful of curious mechanics, continued to chat with Colt, Dex, and Rufus about various engine topics. Rufus seemed slightly more engaged now that Royce was gone, less worried about proving himself and more open to friendly conversation, though he still wore a guarded demeanor. Lily, relieved by the exit of Royce's men, returned to helping her dad. She handed him tools or pointed out details he might have forgotten, occasionally sneaking a glance to ensure everything remained peaceful. Every so often, she shot Faye a thankful smile, as if to say, thank you for stepping in. Harriet circulated with a sign-up sheet, encouraging any of the bikers or townspeople who wanted follow-up sessions to leave their contact info. She managed to get Colt's phone number scribbled onto the sheet, a small but meaningful milestone. He was agreeing to be reachable for future support. Dex also signed up, more willingly than Colt, and he nudged Rufus to do the same. Rufus hesitated but eventually scribbled something. By the time Harriet officially declared the workshop closed, a strange sense of cautious camaraderie had settled. Handshakes were exchanged between a few of the veterans and the Blue Python members. Neil insisted on giving Colt and Dex a set of brand new spark plugs for the next demonstration. Faye caught a glimpse of genuine gratitude in Colt's eyes. Lily tugged on Faye's sleeve as they all began packing up. Hey, Miss Faye, she said softly. Thanks for earlier. If you hadn't stood up to that guy, it might have turned ugly. Faye gave her a gentle smile. No need for thanks. I'm just glad nobody got hurt. She paused. You did well too, Lily, sticking by your dad, encouraging him. Sometimes that's braver than throwing punches. Lily's face lit with a mixture of pride and relief. I just want him to be happy again. You know, without having to act all tough. Faye placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I think he's starting to see there's another way. Meanwhile, Harriet approached them, looking tired but relieved. I'm sorry about that scene, she told Lily, but I'm proud of how you both handled it. Let's call this a partial victory. Lily nodded, then scampered off to help Colt pack up. Harriet leaned toward Faye. If nothing else, we proved that not everyone in the MC is beyond reason. Faye nodded, scanning the clearing out workshop. Yeah, and we also showed the town we're capable of running an event with minimal trouble despite Royce's antics. They watched as Colt instructed Lily on how to reattach a seat panel to his bike, taking quiet pride in her eagerness. Dex and Rufus chatted with a pair of local veterans, exchanging phone numbers for potential future rides, or maybe more mechanical sessions. Even some of the ex-police volunteers wore cautious smiles, as though admitting that this scenario hadn't ended as poorly as they feared. Eventually, Colt finished up, turned to Harriet and Faye, and gave a slow nod. We appreciate the chance, he said, voice still carrying a trace of gruffness. Lily says we should come back next Friday. Maybe I'll bring a different set of parts to show. Harriet beamed. We'd love to have you, and if you ever want to talk about anything else. She held up a flyer for one of the counseling sessions. Colt's gaze lingered on it. Then he took the paper without comment, folding it into his pocket. As the Blue Python members departed, Lily waved, and Dex offered a half salute. Even Rufus managed a quick, tight smile before slipping on his helmet. The thunder of their engines receded into the distance once again. Harriet stood next to Faye, both of them exhaling in tandem. We made it, Harriet murmured. Faye nodded. It's a start, anyway. Neil ambled over, shutting off lights and stacking equipment. That was quite a show, he remarked. But hey, if it helps them get on the straight and narrow, sign me up for more demonstrations. Harriet placed a hand on Neil's shoulder, thanking him for his help. Faye took a moment to reflect. This wasn't the triumphant transformation of the Blue Python MC into perfect citizens, nor was it the disastrous brawl it could have been. It was messy, tense, and uncertain, but it held promise. And sometimes that was all anyone needed to keep going. That evening, Faye found herself at Beverly's diner once more, this time as a customer rather than a waitress. She'd offered to help with the dinner rush, but Beverly insisted she sit down, relax, and eat a real meal for once. The events of the day still buzzed in Faye's mind, a jumble of near confrontations, small triumphs, and the raw potential for deeper change. Beverly brought over a plate of roast chicken and mashed potatoes. On the house, she said, patting Faye's shoulder. Consider it my way of saying thank you for holding everything together. Faye made a face of protest. You've got to let me pay at least once. Beverly waved her off with a smile. Just eat. Then, growing serious, she lowered her voice. Heard the workshop almost derailed, but you stepped in. Another near miss, huh? Faye nodded, stabbing a piece of chicken with her fork. Royce wanted to flex his power, but Dex and Colt managed to hold it together. Barely. She paused, mulling over the tension that still simmered. I'm worried about Royce's influence. He's not going to stop pushing. Across the table, Harriet sat sipping a cup of tea. She'd shown up not long after Faye, also craving a place to decompress. That's likely. Men like him feed off fear and loyalty. But Colt's made his choice. He's reaching for a more constructive path. Might take some time and more friction before it settles. Mr. Martinez, who was finishing his coffee at the next booth, overheard and chimed in. Reckon the key is whether the rest of the club sees more value in this new direction. If Colt can show them respect and a sense of purpose without intimidation, they might follow him. If not, Royce will keep stirring the pot. Faye considered the old veteran's words, recalling how Dex said half the club was curious about a new start, while the other half clung to old habits. Then maybe we need to give them more reasons to pick the new path, she said aloud. Harriet nodded, setting down her tea. Exactly. More workshops, job training sessions, community events, places where they can feel that spark of belonging without criminal activity. The bigger that sense of purpose, the harder it'll be for Royce to pull them back. Beverly tapped her chin thoughtfully. If we're not careful, though, we'll scare half the town. They already think we're coddling criminals. Then we show the town the same positivity, Harriet countered. Invite them to see the transformations firsthand. Let them witness small successes. Over time, maybe the good stories overshadow the bad ones. Faye finally took a bite, savoring the warmth of the roast chicken. You're both right. We can't do this overnight. But if we hold steady, maybe the tension will break in a better direction. Her thoughts flicked to Lily, whose unwavering loyalty to her father was perhaps the biggest motivator for Colt. If Lily's faith could persevere, so could theirs. They finished the meal mostly in companionable silence, each lost in reflections. Later, as Faye stepped into the cool night air, she paused under the diner's neon sign. The quiet hush of the town enveloped her, and she couldn't help but think of all the nights she spent in faraway deserts, scanning the horizon for hidden threats. Here, the threats might be different. Resentment, gang politics, small-town fear. But the core mission was surprisingly similar. Protect and help people who couldn't see a path forward. Looking back at the diner's glowing windows, she spotted Beverly clearing tables, Harriet chatting with a local father and son, and a smattering of regulars finishing their dinners. This was her new battlefield, in a sense, not guns and bullets, but hearts and minds. She felt a wave of determination roll through her. If there was any place to prove that violence didn't have to define someone's future, it was right here in this unassuming town with its unassuming diner, forging hope in the simplest of ways. She tucked her hands into her jacket pockets and started the short walk home, mind already buzzing with possibilities. More skill share, workshops, maybe a community ride, or even a collaborative event that allowed the MC to partner with local charities. The path was uncharted, but so was every important mission she'd ever taken on. And she was, after all, still that quiet warrior who knew how to fight for a better outcome, even when the odds seemed stacked against her.